So this session is titled How Positive Leadership Can Help Us to Lead and Learn Through Complexity and Chaos. And my name's Cornelia Lucey. I'm a leadership psychologist. I'm a chartered psychologist with the BPS. And I run a bespoke consultancy called Cornelia Lucey Positive Leadership, a very original title there. And I work with a whole host of different clients, and essentially my mission, my purpose is to develop senior leaders, their teams and organizations who want to create optimal performance for themselves. So, what I strive to do in life is very aligned to what Holos is doing. And it's great to have this event where like-minded people can come together and share their thoughts and views on leadership. And essentially, well, what does that mean? In other words, we help leaders to be the best versions of themselves. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that means. I work with a whole host of different types of organisations, from cross-sector, from the education sector, charities, corporates, governmental organisations, banks. And I'm really privileged to do that. And I feel like I learn a lot by having that experience of working across sector. And I'm also, as well as being a leadership psychologist and consultant and business owner, I'm also a researcher and author, and my research interests are in well-being, resilience, and positive leadership. And I had a crazy idea a few years ago to start to bring together what we know about how positive psychology can support how we elevate leadership in our leadership practice. And a couple of years ago, started on a research journey with my colleague Yolanta Burke, to bring together everything we know so far about the concept of positive leadership, which I'll be talking about today. And in that book that we co-wrote together, we co-constructed a model which we call the ALIGHT model. And I'm going to talk you through that model today. And it's essentially a summary of what are the key behaviours that leaders demonstrate that bring the best out of themselves and people around them. What is it that they actually do help people to be their best versions of themselves? So building a lot on what we've already heard about today. And so I guess I always start with thinking about my grand design, really, and I'll talk a bit about what grand design means when I come to the model. But who are we deep down as people, and what is it that's actually propelled me or driven me to be so interested in how do we create leaders that bring the best out of themselves and others? And I come from an absolutely enormous Irish family. I have 37 first cousins on my mother's side alone. She's one of 11 children. And I just wanted to exemplify this with two pictures. One is my sister's wedding, my wedding. And this is literally a tiny fraction of my family. They absolutely take over the place. So I come from a huge family. And one of the absolute joys of coming from a huge family is I get to really study human behaviour at a grand scale all of the time. And I've really been struck by the different experiences everyone around me has had over time. And I've really been struck by how the sun is brought out of them. They've had incredible life experiences and journeys, and how for others, have not had the most incredible experiences and life journeys. And although there has been a very keen similarity of genetics, we might say, actually social influences have played a huge part in different people's experiences. And this is where leaderships come in, and why leadership's always fascinated me, because as leaders, we have an incredible responsibility to be able to bring the best out of people around us, and also to bring the worst out of people around us. And so I was really interested that from a very young age, noticing different experiences my huge family were having around me. And I also grew up in the East End of London, and as you know, anyone that knows the East End of London, it's a very eclectic, mixed, multinational, diverse pool of people. And again, really struck by different people's experiences, what everybody kind of went on to do or has done or was doing, and how leadership also played a part in that, whether it was teacher leaders, whether it was head teachers, what people were doing to really bring the best out of people around them. So I suppose that's, I guess, my roots and background. And over a 20 year history now, I've been really privileged again to play lots of roles where I've had the opportunity to interview world leaders, to travel with politicians around the world, to talk to people and to understand more and more about what leaders do to bring the best of others. And a couple of years ago, I was thinking about this, and we were at a really interesting transitional point when it comes to leadership. And I think we are again, and I think Neil's made some really excellent comments on this morning, just looking at all of the chaos we're facing in lots of different areas, from the environment to thinking about how we're working. There's lots of different challenges that we're facing in leadership. And cycle back to 2020, start of 2020, and there was a lot of merging, which I guess was the kind of background again to the book and why I put the book together, on positive practice, positive leadership in practice. We had the Black Lives Matter was really coming to a head. We had the #MeToo movement, and the pandemic then struck and began to kind of explode into our worlds. And all that time I was thinking about the vast amount of research we've now had over 20 plus years in positive psychology to understand what are the factors that really create optimal functioning in human beings. What are they, and how do we bring them into leadership? And so in order to, I suppose, preface that, I want to talk just for a moment about what positive psychology is and how it connects to positive leadership. Now, many people on this call may already know a lot about positive psychology. I don't want to teach anyone here to flip eggs. I know there's a lot of experience and wisdom on this, but for anyone who might be a bit new to this or a bit hesitant about positive psychology, one thing I'd encourage you to do is just completely forget the term positive for a second, because the term positive connotates and denotes lots of understandings which aren't actually unhelpfully enough connected to our understanding of what positive psychology actually is and what positive leadership is, which I'll go on to talk about in a moment. We often think about positivity as, being a form of avoidance, which it can be, a way to avoid problems. And I think this little image kind of reflects some of that as well. And I want you just to put that to the side, and I want you just to think about the term positive and how it applies to psychology and how it applies to leadership and many other sectors with its actual scientific definition. And this is what positive psychology means. It's a scientific study of optimal human functioning aimed to discover and promote the factors that allow individuals and communities to thrive. So it's a field of scientific research that really explores and deep dives into how do individuals and communities actually thrive. And how did it come about? Where did positive psychology launch from? Well, I mean, it has a huge long history, but the reason it's become even more placed in as a movement in psychology and understanding is Martin Seligman, who some of you may have come across, in the late 90s became the president of the American Psychological Association. And he realized that, having been a clinical psychologist, the majority of research we had in psychology at the time was looking at deficit characteristics of human beings. So what is it that makes human beings unwell? What is it that makes human beings become mentally unwell, and how do we work with that? And actually we were missing out a whole wider range of the human experience in understanding what is it that actually makes people well, what is it that makes people thrive, what is it that makes people flourish. We need to explore, research and understand that so we have a more balanced picture of the human experience in psychology and in life. So that's the kind of the angle that I'm coming at leadership with. I'm looking at scientifically, what do we know of the behaviours that create optimal human functioning, and I'm looking at this through the leadership lens. One of the key studies, I suppose, around that time of moving into positive psychology was the mental health continuum, a really landmark piece of research called Languishing to Flourishing by a gentleman called Corey Keyes, who really was able to evidence categorically that human beings, we do not exist on a linear axis of mental illness to mental health. So we're not either mentally ill or mentally healthy. We actually exist on two separate continuums that run alongside each other. We can be both mentally healthy, mentally unwell. And actually, we need to think about all of our human experience at once, both the whole range of emotions we experience. And as leaders, we have the opportunity to support people, you know, wherever they are in each of the continuums of mental health or mental illness. Again, I could go into more detail of that, but moving on to think then about positive leadership and why this is so relevant to hopefully the conference today. We are, over the last 20 years, seeing more and more research and understanding into how do we create organisations and organisational behaviour that create these conditions for optimal functioning. And, you know, I'm standing on the shoulders of incredible people who've done amazing research, including someone called Kim Cameron in the US. And he originally spoke about positive leadership involving the implementation of multiple positive practices that help individuals and their organisations achieve their highest potential, flourish at work, experience elevated energy, and reach levels of effectiveness difficult to attain otherwise. He's the first person to coin this phrase, looking at how do we create extraordinary performance through leadership. And he essentially started to create a first model that is used quite internationally now, that connotates positive leadership as facilitating extraordinary performance, has an affirmative bias, which I'll talk more about in a moment. So it leans towards looking at the opportunities, looking at the strengths of a situation, and it facilitates the best human condition through positive climate, positive relationships, positive communication, positive meaning. This is what positive leadership does. And he has done some incredible research and applied work looking at this particular model. But what Jolanta Burke and I wanted to do was actually really dig deeper into his model and other models that have gone before us in positive leadership to really understand the practice of what positive leadership could look like. This is all very well. This is a lovely idea to have a positive climate, positive relationships, positive communication, etc., to have an affirmative bias. But how do we actually do that? And what do positive leaders do that does this? And what do we know about this? And so essentially we embarked on a 2-year research project, and we reviewed everything we know in the positive psychology literature around what creates optimal human functioning. So what are the key topics that come up? What's the key research areas in positive psychology? And we looked at those in tandem with reviewing those topics in the leadership space and how they manifest through leadership. And anyway, looking at all of this research and this literature, and also our collective experience in leadership, we narrowed down all of the topics that came up into a 6-element ALIGHT theoretical model, which I'll talk you through now. And on top of that, we then went out and we tested that model. We interviewed leaders who had been put forward as being really great examples of people that brought the best out of others, to understand how these particular behaviours resources of the ALIGHT model showed up in them. So what I'd like you to do now, before I go on to kind of share a bit more about what our research showed, is I want you to just take a moment of self-reflection and think about a leader, a manager, boss, a colleague, a family figure, whoever it is, that really brought the best out of you. What did you notice about the behaviour that did this? So think about someone you've got in mind. It might have been a former boss, it might be a current boss, it might be a family member. Who is it that actually brought the best out of you? And what did you notice about their behaviour? What did they do in their behaviour to bring the best out of you? You can have a think about that in your mind. You can jot some notes down, however you best like to reflect. I think someone was talking earlier on about note-taking and people being too busy note-taking to pay attention. And I'm actually a massive note-taker. So I slightly disagreed with that. And I think we all reflect in different ways. So reflect however you feel best to do that. Okay, so we'll come back to that in a moment. So what did we actually find out in our research? And this has come up a theme already today, but what positive leaders do in practice is they create a safe environment for their team. They create an environment where people feel able to talk, to express, to put their hand up, to suggest an idea. And I encourage you to feel safe to do that as well through the chat. And I'll pause in a moment to see what if comes through in the chat too. They thoroughly engage with strengths and resources. So they're really aware of strengths and resources in themselves and people around them. And they elevate those. Equally, likewise, where they might be absent too. And I'll talk a bit about that. And essentially, we say that positive leadership is two things. It's a balanced way of leading that negotiates challenge, conflict, and suffering with optimal performance, flourishing, and compassionate being. And it's also blended and integrated sets of intellectual, psychological, emotional, and social resources. So it's a whole set of resources that we have at our access. And I think Neil spoke about this earlier on, about leadership being a choice and being a decision, and not necessarily a constant way of being, but it's what we do in a moment where we need to act. Positive leadership is essentially a set of resources that we can pull upon, draw upon, and develop. And I'll talk about this later on as well. You know, it isn't a superhero way of being. It's not the kind of being the perfectest, whitest page in terms of your behavior, but it's leaning on a set of resources that you know will help you to be the best version of yourself and people around you when the time and the moment calls for it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the model. I'm just going to check the chat, and we've got some nice mixture of people being here. So thank you very much for sharing that whole range of leadership roles. So thank you. Father, husband, company owner, associates, client, self. Okay, lovely. Thank you very much, everyone, for sharing what you do. And someone based in Milan, how lovely. So there's a whole range of roles that we play as leaders, and what we essentially found in our research, where there were 6 sets of resources that positive leaders and positive leadership demonstrated, and we thematized these, and they also were broken down further, which I'll speak to you in a moment. But it's a helpful mnemonic, which I hope you'll find helpful. Some people have found it really helpful so far. Whereas essentially it's demonstrating abundance, limberness, inspiration, grand design, health, and tribe. So there's a whole set of resources that we see that come through in positive leadership. And actually, when you dig into this, underneath these 6 sets of resources are particular ways of behaving, of being, which I'm going to talk through in a bit more detail. So let me just break down that light bulb jigsaw puzzle for you a bit further. What are those 6 key resources? So abundance is made up of strengths mindset, strength spotting, and strategy use. So what do we mean by that? So positive leaders, positive leadership demonstrate abundance. They deliberately have an appreciative lens on a situation. Some of you may have come across appreciative inquiry, and that's very much the focus here. So rather than focus on all the things that are going wrong, because there will always be things that are going wrong, they bear those in mind, but they think about what is actually going really well here. What do we need to build on that's going really well, and take a deliberate appreciative focus. They also strength spot, so they know the strengths of themselves, they're able to identify the strengths of themselves, and they identify the strengths in others. They're aware that actually, you know, there aren't one core set of strengths that make everyone the best person for any particular role or job. They're able to spread out and distribute leadership based on the strengths that are in any given team, moment, or situation. And they make sure that they apply those strengths and they encourage others to apply their own strengths constantly in any given moment. And in doing this, we see a whole host of really positive outcomes. So that greater engagement from people around that particular leader, increased well-being, increased sense of self-efficacy, loads of really delightful outcomes that we want to see, particularly when we're working in a time of chaos. And then looking at the next piece of the jigsaw puzzle, limberness. What is limberness? So limberness, probably one of my favourite words in the model entirely, is essentially the ability to adapt in a given situation, to change the response in a given situation, to be emotionally agile. So to be selective about what is my cognitive or emotional response in this given situation, and to be resilient, which is about being able to actually grow from the situation in front of you. So this is what positive leadership is about. It's about being able to adapt, to be emotionally agile, and to be resilient. And that's what positive leaders do in their behaviour and demonstrate that to people around them. Moving on to the third part of the jigsaw then, looking at inspiration. Inspiration isn't about charisma. It's not about necessarily being the most funny, comedic, value person in the room. Demonstrating inspiration, when we digged into the research, was really about having a really strong sense of self-efficacy. So feeling like you really know and can expect the best in what you're doing, and a sense of self-assuredness around that. Having optimism and hope. So being really optimistic about what the future holds, and also being hopeful about that. And hopeful is about having that sense of agency, but it's also about having the pathways to move towards the direction that you want to go in. So you can see that there's a difference between optimism and hope. So it's not just about wishful thinking, about future thinking, but it's also about hope, being really kind of clear about developing the pathways to get to where you need to go. And that's what inspiration is about in positive leadership in practice. And the third component of inspiration is being able to create and develop energizing networks. So bringing that enthusiasm to the table for you as a leader, but also supporting others around you to do that and create networks of energy around a topic, situation, problem, challenge. Grand design then, again, this has come up a little bit earlier on today as well. Grand design is essentially about having that full complex vision of what is going on, really understanding the meaning for why you are doing what you're doing, and underneath that meaning, understanding what the narrative then, or the plot of the meaning will look like, is the purpose. So understanding how the meaning actually will play out in the narrative of what we're doing day to day. And then as well as having that, that meaning and that purpose, being catabolic about that. So we call this catabolism. And catabolism is essentially about really breaking down, and we're borrowing it from a biological term, really breaking down the meaning and purpose into what we are doing day to day, moment to moment, hour to hour. And this is what positive leadership and positive leaders do. Health. And I was pleased to notice Neil talk earlier on about the importance to understand the energy within us, and to make sure that we are well energized in order to do the best job that we can. And positive leaders and positive leaderships are very conscious of this. And it's about really being healthy and health in the way that we approach decisions, think about decisions. And there's 3 layers to how positive leaders do this. And that's about the promotion of healthy behavior. That's about, being able to say, this is really important. We can think about well-being as an example. We can think about sustainability as an example. It's about showing the way to healthy behavior, and then orientating positive leadership. We're able to not just promote this healthy behavior, but really take action towards that. And then the integration piece was actually taking that one step further and actually integrating being healthy about everything you're doing on a day-to-day basis. So whether it's thinking about the team's workload, whether it's thinking about the spread of what we needed to do over a particular period of time, it's thinking about all of those things, and it's thinking about all of the impact of any decision that's being made on your stakeholders and all the different stakeholders that are affected in any decision that you're taking. So that was the key the health aspect of the ALIGHT framework. And then the last final part of the framework, looking at tribe. Positive leaders were very able to build tribe around them. And the way that they did that was through 3 particular behaviours. It was through connection and interpersonal processes. So building connection with people around them, having really high quality connections, which is essentially about not just building the connection around you and interacting and connecting with everyone around you, but taking the opportunity to build really deep connections in the moment as well. And positive conflict, which is the third part of tribe, is all about actually leaning into conflict. How do we ensure that we don't shy away from conflict? I know we were talking earlier on today about actually how difficult it is for people to be really honest about what they're thinking and what they're feeling. And positive leadership really leans into that honesty and being able to access positive conflict, and not seeing conflict as something that we should shy away from, but actually seeing that it can bear fruit and is something really positive for us. So they're the 6 different components of the ALIGHT model. Again, I could go into those in more depth. I suppose there's just a few things I want to say about this model and what our research showed. And you know, all of these 6 different resources, they're all developable and they all go together. We use them at different volumes, and we use them at different levels based on the given situation, but they all go together. It's very difficult to take health away from us being able to think about positive leadership. It's very difficult to take away tribe or limberness or inspiration when we think about this model. They all go hand in hand. We might use them at different levels and balance them out at different levels when we need to, but they all go hand in hand. And they have a kind of real interconnectedness between them. And you'll have noticed when I was talking about them, you may have been drawing connections between the different parts yourself. And also, it's, you know, not about being a superhero. I said that earlier on. Positive leadership isn't, you know, it isn't a style. It isn't a you must do this model. It is essentially an opportunity to think about what are all the key behaviours that we demonstrate, that we can demonstrate, that can bring the best out of ourselves and others around us. And when we interviewed a range of different positive leaders who would have fitted the positive leadership criteria, they were very much clear that they worked really hard on being able to demonstrate these behaviours. They were very much, you know, making a choice about these behaviours, and we don't always do that, and sometimes we don't have the energy to do that, but there is a possibility and capability in all of us to lean into all of these 18 components of this 6-part model. So on that note, I want us really to just do again some reflection in breakout rooms, and just kind of checking we're okay with Tessa. You know, let me know if we're not, but essentially moving into some breakout rooms to think about each part or theme of this model a bit more in detail. So first of all, thinking about abundance, I'd love everyone who's in that group, that breakout area, to think about what strengths you've recently noticed in yourself, in others, and what helped you to do this. And also, did you share what you noticed with yourself or others, and what got in the way if you didn't? So if you're in breakout room 1, and hopefully we'll have some time, we'll see how we're doing to actually share some of this back. Breakout room 2, limberness. What could help you to maintain an adaptive and non-reactive mindset? Okay, that's the miracle question for breakout room 2. In breakout room 3, how high is your optimism or hope? How much do you believe in yourself? What helps? Breakout room 4, what drives you in life or gives your life meaning? How do you bring this to life in your day-to-day? How could you do this more? So time to think about your grand design in group 4. And group 5, how aware of your health and others' health are you in your decision making? How aware are you as a system within which the impact of your decisions will play out? And if you're in breakout room 6, how do you create time to connect in your day-to-day? And how can you lean more into conflict with good intentions? So just a few things for us to reflect on, and breaking that down into different groups, and just checking. We've got all of them up there, but just checking, are we okay to jump in, Tessa, to the breakout rooms?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to make sure that you want people to be able to self-select.
Yeah, they can do, or we can put people into a group. We might end up having everyone in one particular area. I don't mind.
If you want to assign automatically,
should we have a quick vote just on chat? Does anyone want to jump in and say, what would you prefer to do? Would you like to choose or assign automatically? So choose or be assigned. want to let us know? Automatic. Okay, fab. Welcome back, everybody. That was a very speedy few minutes, and apologies to one particular group who we foisted 2 topics onto, and they felt very rushed. But no pressure here whatsoever. Let's just, I suppose, just share some reflections then from each of the rooms. So who was in the abundance room? And the questions we had were, what strengths have you recently noticed in yourself and in others that helped you do this? Did you share what you noticed in yourself or others? What got in the way if you did? So who was in the abundance room in the group?
Me and Angela. And Angela, I wonder if you want to summarise.
Thank you, Matt.
Great leadership there.
If you don't, I will.
I'm more than happy. Thank you. It's really interesting. We were talking around, you know, kind of getting to a level of awareness, and I kind of was going like this. It's a real, almost tactile, granular level of awareness about where we are in a particular moment, and our emotional state and our feel of abundance or of lack, or of upward energy or downward. And Matt was telling a brilliant story about the perils and delights of teaching your children how to drive. And, you know, kind of one scenario versus the other, and how having the intention and the desire to build people up and to nourish created and you know, kind of yield so much more productive results. And he was also sharing the story around in a session very recently. The whole afternoon session was just, can you change it to do so and so, which he adapted to brilliantly, but in the moment was able to say, wow, Matt, you're really calm. This is you're doing really well. So that is self-acknowledgement and abundance of that nourishment. Really important.
Really interesting. Thanks for sharing, Angela. Matthew, thought we had a great conversation. And as you were talking as well, Angela, it really linked to the limberness part as well, that, you know, needing to kind of do that stepping back, being aware in order to be able to think about how to be abundant and to acknowledge our strengths. So there's a real interconnectedness. Thank you. Really interesting. I'm not sure if I'll let my daughter in my car though, but yeah, thank you. Who was in the limberness group then? What could help you to maintain an adaptive and non-reactive mindset? The $1 million question.
So we were asked, we were asked to look at that. We spend quite a lot of time on hell.
We weren't sufficiently adaptable to do limberness.
But
I just realised that, I totally forgot. Do you feel happy to share?
Yeah, I think as you were talking through originally, there were a few things that, because I'm a perennial note taker as well, so there were a few things that came to mind. So sort of the 4 things that we tend to focus on in our organisation is we have like the 4 rules. So coming from a place of curiosity, not conclusion. So really assuming best intentions, and if you're feeling like you're getting triggered, asking questions so you can better understand the other person's position, or supporting that facilitation as it's being discussed. I think the power of the pause is really important, you know, actively listening without a need to respond or react necessarily, but just giving people that time and space and freedom to get to the end of their thought processes is quite important. Understanding yourself, so getting to know your own triggers and understanding how to manage those in the best way for you. And then linking to the health bit, which is where I'm going to segue to Neil and Mark, is the idea around, you know, ensuring that you've replenished your energy, because one of the quickest ways to become emotionally reactive and lose that adaptability is if you feel depleted and drained yourself, because you have fewer energy supplies to draw on, which naturally leads us into health, which I'll talk about in a minute, I'm sure.
Yeah, really helpful insight. Thanks so much for sharing that. That's great. Let's move to inspiration then. What's the kind of key reflections from inspiration? Quite a difficult one to conceptualize, I think, as well, thinking about the grand design. Sorry,
that was myself and Nikki, and we were inspired to talk about something a little bit different from your questions. I hope that was
great. I love that. Tell me, what did you discuss?
Nikki, do you want to, can I throw it over to you to start? Because your comments that you started with really got me thinking.
Yeah, sure. Apologies for the camera off, but I'm in a shared workspace and you don't want them all glaring at you today. So my background is in social psychology. So we just went off on a bit of a tangent and we're having a bit of a chat around how, for me, positive psychology has a sort of a slightly different connotation, as I view it along the same lines as it's sort of living in a neoliberalistic backdrop, and how that places a lot of emphasis on the individual to take responsibility for their outcomes, linking in with the social factors that sit alongside that can impact it. We then moved on to talk about self-belief and how we felt that it was very much a movable feast. It depended on what sort of challenges you were facing, how you were meeting those challenges. And we also talked a little bit about how the benefits of self-belief being informed by your learnings and your experience. And also we mentioned that my experience of where you're working with people who have a huge amount of self-belief that is grounded in nothing substantial whatsoever, and the implications of when that arises. And also a little bit around solo working. So how you have to maintain your own self-worth when you can't have the benefit of interaction with other people quite so much. Did I miss anything, Jeremy?
No, quality summarising, thank you.
Yeah, really interesting. Thank you so much. Really loads of tangents and things that we could explore with that. And I totally get your point about, neoliberalism and positive psychology. And I think definitely kind of first wave positive psychology very much sits in that umbrella. And again, happy to kind of talk more on this, but there's been a second wave and a third wave of positive psychology, which is very much looking more at the group and the system and the wider perspective. So but really interesting, and so many different interesting topics there, and particularly interested in that kind of self-worth of the solo worker, resonated on a personal level. So thank you, Nikki. I'm keeping consciously an eye on the time, as we always do when we run these sessions, and I'm just going to ask, make sure we get a quick, I guess, reflection from Grand Design, Health and Tribe, and then I've got, I suppose, a final question for everyone to think of. So Grand Design, quick reflections from you then. What were your what did you reflect on thinking about the question around that you had? So I'll just read out the question for that group. What drives you in life or gives your life meaning? How do you bring this to life in your day-to-day? How could you do this more? What came up for you when you discussed that?
Jenny and myself, we spoke about a little bit of a change that certainly I've made in more recent times, and one of the things, one of the questions to ask ourselves is, well, what are we all chasing? What are we living for? And what is our purpose in life? And sometimes that is intensified through fear, and that's intensified through what are known as our survival mode instincts, our fight, flight and freeze responses. And sometimes our purpose can be overwhelmed by the intensity of either one of those particular responses, natural responses that the human body has, being prevalent. So being able to go through a process of reversing that, or knowing that's there, and thanking your body and having gratitude for your brain and your body for being able to understand that is actually happening, can give a new sense of just being. So rather than shoulds and coulds, allowing us to just be.
Really interesting. And you're making me think, when you're sharing, Russell, about that connection to limberness with Grand Design. So being able to be emotionally agile, to be able to notice that I'm being driven by fear in what I'm doing here. How can I step back from it? Thank you. Some amazing reflections, and I'd love to spend so much more time on these. Really interesting. And from health, I'm going to jump over to health. We had two health groups. So who was in the non-Emma Neil group? I'm just going to say that just to make sure we've heard from your group as well. Who was in health? Anyone here? If not, I'll go back to.
Everyone's being very modest. So I was with Tan Ram and Egle. I think just the question, how aware are we of it? The sense was far more aware than perhaps we used to be, but that doesn't mean that it makes it easy to do something about it. We talked about how leadership can help create the permission to make good decisions there, but that actually leaders are often the worst to do that as well. And so and part of that is perhaps about that sense of or losing perspective, that sense of importance that, oh, it's all on me. And being invested in it as well. And therefore, the last thing we talked about then was about boundaries. You know, it's fine to be invested and taking ownership in your work, but you've got to set the boundaries. And maybe that's the role of the team. And the interdependence of a team is that you help share those boundaries and help other people to set those boundaries too. Hopefully that's a fair summation.
Great. Yeah, you thumbs up there, Luke. That's really interesting. Thank you for sharing. And I think, you know, if we think about the health component, we're thinking about the promotion of health, the orientation towards health and the full integration of it. And I think, you know, we are much more aware of thinking about health. That kind of promotion piece is much more there, it's present. Actually orientating ourselves, integrating it into what we're doing does require a lot of boundaries. And so, yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. And tribe, last but not least, who is the tribe group? Neil, I hope you don't mind, I'm going to leave your group for the moment and just jump to tribe. Who was in tribe?
Yeah, I was in tribe, and Emily and Martina. So I'll try. I didn't take any notes, but we just had an interesting conversation around more about the conflict than around connecting in your day. And we talked around how, well, one, there was a question around as women, do we find that harder in terms of senior leadership positions? How do we present conflict? And then we also talked about it's how, you know, leaning into conflict is easier if you know that someone else quite enjoys that as well and doesn't see it as conflict, but sees it as constructive challenge. But if someone gets defensive or takes it personally, once you've had that experience with them, then it's harder to feel that they're seeing it in that lens as you. So how do you talk about it in a way that is very much on the issue and not the person? But it does mean that you potentially overthink how you're going to communicate that and how you're going to get into the conflict. Which might mean that it's not, even if it's done with good intention, might end up being a confusing message, which doesn't help having that conversation. Did I miss anything, group? I
You did a great job, I'm sure. Thanks so much, Lexia, for speaking there. And, you know, there are a lot of cultural conditions that need to be in place for this to work. And I think you've identified that as well. You know, knowing that you can have that conversation is really important. So thank you for sharing that. I think we're running out of time, but I'm going to just, I suppose, finalise by saying that if you'd like to assess your own positive leadership levels, there is an assessment within the book. It's been developed and further as well, so it'll be revalidated as well next year. There's lots of practical ways about how we can develop the resources and components for self and others. I know lots of people here work with other people, so I'd encourage that use of the questionnaire, just applying in practice, also just having a conversation more. You all seem like really fascinating bunch, so if you ever want to have a chat, jump on a Zoom, discuss further, I'd be really happy to do that and hear your views and learn more. I'm on LinkedIn, and you can also email me, Cornelia Lucey at outlook.com. And yeah, there's a discount code there if you buy it from Routledge, but you can also buy it from Amazon if you're interested in the book, but feel free to buy other books too. But thank you everyone for your time, and really enjoyed talking with you all.